To celebrate my Valentine's Day special of having my books about 75% off for the month of February, I'm going to read the opening chapter. So I hope you enjoy story time. Let me see. Chapter 1. Greta Mayer dashed down the carpeted hallway of Swift Financial, ignoring the agony of power walking in 3-inch heels. The pain was minuscule compared to the dread pooling in her stomach. She had lost track of time again. Sure, she'd managed to fix the in-house software issue, but meanwhile had forgotten the new client meeting. Glancing at her tiny gold Rolex, she groaned. Less than 5 minutes to make it to the other end of the building. She could picture her boss's disappointed face, made all the more stressful because it was her father. The image had Greta quickening her pace to a near sprint. Rounding the final corner, she sighed. The large glass doors were propped open. Relieved calmed some of her anxiety. She wasn't late. Inside the conference room, her assistant, Ray, motioned to the empty seat next to her. Greta nodded and skated alongside the outermost edges of the table, wishing she were smaller, invisible. She hoped no one noticed her nearly tardy arrival. The last thing she wanted was to come across as an empty-headed daughter of the boss, someone who had gotten the internship through nepotism. Therefore, any misstep ate at her confidence like termites to wood. She took her seat next to Ray and tried to squash her rampant doubts. Running a shaky hand over her chignon, she made sure every hair was in place. "Where's Alan?" Greta glanced around the table while needlessly straightening the collar of her pale pink blouse, realizing she was fidgeting. Putting her anxiety on full display, she stilled and met Ray's gaze. She handed the client folder to Greta, who hadn't had time to open it, and sighed. Another virus was detected on Blake's computer. He demanded we fix it, like yesterday. Alan's working on it. Greta accepted the portfolio, her worry shifting to annoyance. She didn't want to talk about her ex-fiancé, much less be reminded he was in-house counsel. Before their breakup, they had hardly ran into each other at work. Now Blake kept inventing problems with his PC and contacting the IT department. Ray and Alan found it hilarious, but Greta despised the drama. It made her and Blake appear unprofessional. Refusing to meet Ray's playful smile, Greta peered down at the end of the table at her father. His back was to a large window with its blinds pulled. The leaves from the giant elm oak trees swayed in the lazy breeze, helping to block Michigan's summer sun from the room. She'd love to be out there, relaxing in the shade, free of stress and enjoying the summer. Her gaze zeroed back to her father, and the usual mixture of pride and discontent filled her. She understood he only wanted the best for her, but sometimes his rigidness was stifling. Carrying her father's expectations and the possible disappointment of her was a heavy burden to shoulder. Thankfully, he hadn't noticed her near late arrival time. There'd be no displeased glances, no lectures concerning punctuality. He appeared distracted, deep in conversation with the man he assumed was a new client. She gave an inward sigh of relief, allowing some of her distress to dissolve. Father's career talks turned back the clock, and suddenly she was closer to 7 than 27. Enjoying the reprieve, she relaxed into her seat and studied the client. He sat sideways, elbow propped on the table, large hand covering most of his face as he talked with her father. There was something familiar about the set of the client's broad shoulders and his inky black hair. Inexplicably, her heart began to race. Watching him filled her with trepidation and an unexpected yearning. Her father faced the room, pulling her gaze from the stranger to the wall clock. Yep, 10 on the dot. The meetings never started late. She glanced back at the client and choked on an exhale, her heart plummeting. He had dropped his hand and was facing forward. It can't be him. Her heart skipped with joy, then promptly flooded with dread. "You okay?" Ray whispered. Her voice sounded far away and wrapped in fog. Greta couldn't answer because the client's familiar icy blue gaze had locked on hers. His eyes widened in recognition. He was clean-shaven, and today his hair was neat and combed back, but there was no mistaking him. Jacob. He had one of those striking faces impossible to forget, memories of the way his bedroom eyes had heated when he had taken in her naked body, or how his full lips had ravished her, made him unforgettable. However, she wished he'd slipped from her memory and the conference room. Whatever his reason for being here wouldn't be good for her. "Good morning, and let me introduce Mr. Jacob Grimm," said her father. Hearing his name, Jacob turned towards her father, allowing her to breathe. Ray nudged Greta, probably waiting for an answer. Too bad, she was admitting nothing. He runs WeWork, a business repairing and refurbishing antiques. We're taking it to the next level, continued her father. He plans on opening a brick and mortar shop in Detroit and developing a better online presence. Business owner? No. Someone had made a huge mistake. Jacob didn't belong at her father's conference table. He was a delivery man. He worked for his uncle. It's what he told her at her mother and stepfather's home. So why was he here instead of lifting heavy boxes and breaking promises? Greta flipped through the file Ray had given her. Successful was an understatement. His client base was impressive, as there were big names on the dossier. Stapled to the back of the folder was a copy of Jacob's license. Foolish woman, hadn't her father always told her to come to meetings prepared? Had she even glanced at the file, she would have recognized Jacob in an instant. Weeks had passed, but the foolish, impulsive afternoon was far from forgotten. As her father addressed the room, Greta focused on Jacob's picture. She found it safer than facing the actual man. They'd only spent a couple of hours together, but his wicked full mouth and penetrating gaze had been impossible to forget, along with his magical ability to destroy all her restraints. Greta still couldn't quite believe how easily her inhibitions had fled in the company of a perfect stranger. She closed the folder and rubbed her sweaty palms on her pleated linen skirt. She stared at her father and tried to concentrate on his words, though he could have been speaking another language and she would have noticed. There was no way she could swallow her embarrassment and work with Jacob, not even for a day, let alone a week or more. Her pulse thudded in her ears. What if he bragged about his one-night stand with the boss's daughter? Father would kill her. Not literally, but professionally. He wouldn't want the family name smeared in tawdry office gossip. He had promised after she graduated with her master's in web development that she'd take over Swift's websites and handle the clients needing web development help. Would the offer still stand if he learned of her history with Jacob? So much for proving herself with a summer internship. Greta wanted to weep at the disappearance of her imagined stellar profile. Swift Financial would have been wonderful on her resume. Focus. I need to focus and get control of the situation. Leaning in, she whispered to Ray, I need to go. Would you and Alan mind handling this account? I'll owe you one. What's wrong? Ray's forehead furrowed with concern. The question was too big to answer now. Later she'll have to. Will you do this for me? Ray bit her lip. I'll try, but you know your father wants you in charge of the web designing. Yes, I know. Hopefully he'll come up with a stellar excuse to wiggle out of WeWork's contract. She'd worry about that later and mouth a thank you and gather her papers. When there was a pause in the main conversation, she addressed the room. I'm sorry, there's been a mistake. Alan Cardby will handle the account with Miss Catlin. She stood. I'll find him. Her father's stern voice stopped her. No, Miss Meyer, the account is yours and Mrs. Catlin's. I have another project in mind for Mr. Cardby. His tone brooked no argument. Darn it. There went her quick and painless getaway. She nodded. To argue was pointless. It would only anger her father. Returning to her seat, she glanced covertly at Jacob. He had lost most of his color and looked like he had been poked with a cattle prod. Replaying the exchange, she realized she'd been addressed by her last name. Jacob must have caught it and grasped the significance. He appeared rattled. Good. Maybe he didn't want to share their secret any more than she did. Thank goodness. It would save her from her father's wrath. Next challenge, squashing her lingering thrill at seeing Jacob again. I hope you enjoyed the reading of Chapter 1. And like I said, for the month of February as a Valentine's treat, it is like 70% off on all main platforms like Amazon, Apple Books, Google, all of them. Thank you for listening.